Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to welcome you at the next edition of the podcast EUEA.Dialogues. My name is Olena Rybak. I'm the vice chair of the board of the European Ukrainian Energy Agency, and in this podcast, we hold conversations that matter. Our today's topic will be about rebuilding home, social housing in post-war Ukraine. Very relevant and challenging issue given how many internally displaced people Ukraine has currently, both within the country and those who had to flee the country due to Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022. This is a big task ahead of us, and I'm very pleased to welcome our guest for today, Mr. Jan Ruuth, who is the Senior Project Manager and Advisor for Swedish International Development Agency, but is also currently seconded to the Ukraine service at the European Commission in Brussels. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you very much, Lena.
Jan, you have been working for many years in Ukraine in different capacities, from the investment sector, international development organizations, international financial institutions, and you, of course, know Ukraine very well, to say the least. And now, based in Brussels, being part of the Ukraine team, Ukraine services team in the European Commission, I have to note, we understand that this is an expert communication. We understand that we're not now discussing any official positions of the European Commission whatsoever. So, but given this topic and rebuilding homes and the social housing in Ukraine, you have been engaged in this topic also in your recent activities. So I'm very happy that you could be here with us today. And maybe then we jump into the topic itself, because I'm very often holding these conversations, and we are implementing reconstruction projects. But social housing is something that people very often understand very differently, because there are different models, different experiences. So maybe we start here. What is this social housing, and which type of it exists? Maybe you can start sharing with us there.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. But I mean, to start with, I would like to underline that I'm quite new to the housing sector. I mean, I've been working on housing sectors since the last 2 years, since I came to Brussels. But I have been working with Ukrainian municipalities and on municipal services like water, wastewater, district heating. So from that point of view, it's not very far. However, housing is definitely a different kind of beast than district heating. But anyhow, I mean, in Ukraine at the moment, the housing question is such a very important topic. And this is also for the Ukraine service, where I've been now for the last 2 years. And from that point of view, I've been really deep diving into the sector during the last two years. So even if I'm not the real expert, I've learned a lot from experts in the field since the last 2 years. And your question about what is social housing, and as you say, I mean, in the Ukrainian context, I think we need to think about that Ukrainians, they believe that what was during the Soviet time, I mean, the social housing existing during the Soviet time was bad. And then there was this reform when all the housing was privatized. So nowadays there is private housing, people own their own apartments, but this municipally owned social housing that existed before 1991, they don't exist any longer. However, in Europe and in other parts of the world, this is actually quite a large part of the housing available for people. And there are different kinds of social housing. And if you look at Europe, there are two main kinds. It's the housing, the municipal housing, housing owned by municipalities, municipal housing utilities. And this exists in Austria, for example, in France, in Germany, or in Finland. And then another type of option is the non-profit and cooperative housing, which is a different, I mean, it's not owned by the municipalities, it's more I mean, a cooperative owned by both the people who live there and some organization, non-profit organizations. And that exists, for example, in Denmark, in Switzerland, and in the Netherlands. And when you speak about social affordable housing, it's important to say that you need to have a rent, a cost rent, which, I mean, the rent that cover the costs for operations and management of the housing. If you don't have cost rent, you will need to have subsidies, and this means that in the long run, this will not be sustainable.
Okay, but it's not free. So social housing,
No.
this is very often a frequent misperception in Ukraine that
Yes.
whatever is social has to be free, right? But this doesn't
Yes.
work like
Yes.
this.
Yes. No. I mean, this is cannot be free. I mean, if you look at my home country, Sweden, for example, there you have in many or in all cities, you have a municipal housing utility that provides 30 to 50% of the housing stock. However, the rents you pay, it needs to pay the cost. So it's not like you're getting it for free. And people who have more vulnerable groups, they get allowance from the state or from the municipality, but it's not going through the municipal housing utility.
Okay. So basically, even if you received something at the affordable rate or affordable payment, it's not anything that you can, like, then live for free and pay nothing and consume whatever. Because we had these cases already in Ukraine when
Yes,
people
yes,
receiving even temporary
yes,
temporary housing are expecting that
yeah,
they can't be charged because donors
yes,
financed it, right? But of course,
yes,
things break, things need to be repaired. Okay,
yeah.
and what, from your experience, what would be the most successful models, right? Because as you said, there can be ownership by municipalities. It's not about private ownership, is that right? So they are never then in the end owned by the users or residents of this housing, right? And is there more successful model or less successful for our understanding?
I mean, there are different models in Europe, but I mean, the main principle is that if you take Denmark, for example, there you have state subsidies to build and construct these, or Finland, uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and once you have constructed the housing, the people who pay the rent, they need to pay the cost for the production of the house. I mean, the loans and the amortizations and also management. And then it's also a little bit, I mean, surplus profit that the housing utility can use to pay for the construction of new housing. So this is kind
Mm-hmm.
of the trick in
Like a
order to make
revolving
it,
fund.
it's like a revolving fund. And the other thing is that you should not allow these housing units to be privatized. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you have the municipality, they have invested in the construction of this housing. If you then 10 years down the road, you privatize and you give it to or people buy
Mm-hmm.
it, I mean, the equity that you have put in from the municipality, it's then transferred to the private owners of this housing units. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore, it's very important as well that I mean these housing. I mean, they are there for the municipality to own and to manage and to rent, and not for people to privatize. And I think this will be a problem in Ukraine, where you've had this reform where all this municipal housing was, so municipal or state-owned housing was privatized, and nowadays people think that uh, housing owned by municipality or the state is kind of the Soviet style, but it's not. I mean, this is very modern, and this is how it works in many of the European countries.
It's interesting, but yeah, in Austria, I don't know if in entire Austria, but at least in Vienna, they have one of these models when you can almost inherit a social house, right? So you are getting it not just for 10 years or until you, I don't know, die, I'm sorry, right, or until you use it. If you have children in this house, they can pretty much inherit it, of course, with the consideration of the average household income. And I don't know, it's a very popular model here. But from these options, what do you think, in your knowledge of Ukraine and your engagement now in all these different activities, what do you think would work best for Ukraine?
I mean, what could work best for Ukraine? I mean, it's very difficult to say because it depends on many different factors. However, if you look at European experience, what we have in Europe, there's a lot of different experience that could be used. But I think that Ukraine need to create their own model. They cannot say that, okay, Austria, that's the best model, we just copy it. I mean, there are different parts of the Austrian model that would be useful in Ukraine. They could also use from Poland, which is a neighboring country with experience from being, I mean, a former communist country. So I think that Ukraine needs to create their own understanding. What is the housing, social housing from their point of view? They cannot copy something, but take the different parts that exist. But luckily, there's a lot of expertise out there willing to support Ukraine. And there's a lot of expertise in housing who has worked the last couple of years on supporting Ukraine in developing these kind of different schemes and modalities. So I'm sure that with the support of European Union and many other donors and international partners, we will be able to support Ukraine if there is if we can do this. And one thing which I may come to later as well is that, I mean, Ukraine at the moment, you still have the housing code from the 1980s, the one from, I think it's from 1984. And this means that this needs to be reformed. They need to do a new housing code. And there has been many attempts during the last 30 years to reform the housing code, but for different reasons, it has not been possible to do this. I
And
mean,
what
there's
would
been
this
vested.
reform allow us to do? This reform of the housing
I
code?
mean, the reform would, first of all, allow you to have a more modern housing code. I mean, a modern housing code, because every country, modern country in Europe, you have a modern housing code, which is kind of the right to housing is a human right.
Mhm.
And the human right is also codified in the constitution of many countries. And when you do the housing, I mean, you need to look at different aspects of housing. For example, the rights of tenancy, that if
Mhm.
you live in the apartment, that you will not be allowed, the landlord cannot
Kick you out.
kick you out for no good reason. And at the moment in Ukraine, this is not very well regulated. So there's, I mean, and but currently there is actually ongoing a lot of different reforms, including I mean, a change of the housing code. So there's now something that they called the General Principles Law for Housing, which is something that has been drafted by the Ministry of Development and which has been discussed with different partners, including with the European Commission, with the World Bank, with the European Investment Bank, and many other partners. So the way that this general principles law on housing has been drafted, it takes into account all of these different aspects that are needed in a more uh, sovereign, a more modern or sophisticated housing code. However, it's still not being adopted by the Rada. I mean, it was submitted to the Rada in January this year.
Mhm.
However, nothing has changed yet. I mean, mainly due to the fact that, I mean, now in wartime it's difficult for the Rada to work, but still there are reforms that needs to be
No, this is
implemented.
important
And
reform, and
yes, yes,
they of course,
yes,
in parallel of the conversation of trying
yes,
to bring back
yes,
the internally displaced people, there also have to be
yes,
actions
exactly,
taken, right?
exactly.
So, okay, this
Yes.
is the big bottleneck, and but what else is in progress that would require, I don't know, maybe faster progress? Are there other priority to do things on the list?
I mean, I would like to explain to you a little bit about what is currently being done and how we are supporting Ukraine, the government of
Hmm.
Ukraine in this. Because, I mean, from the European Commission, you know that there is the Ukraine facility, the 50 billion facility supporting Ukraine with reforms. And this facility, it has three different pillars. The first pillar is the budget support, 39 billion. The second pillar is guarantees and blended finance, roughly 9 billion. And the third pillar is the technical assistance, 4 billion. And for Ukraine to get access to the first pillar, to the 39 billion, they have drafted this Ukraine plan, which is a reform plan for Ukraine's reform in different sectors. It's in housing, it's in energy, it's in transport, it's in rule of law, and many different aspects. And when it comes to housing, there are two milestones that Ukraine need to fulfill to get access to this budget support. And those are two legislations. The one is this general principles law on housing, and this should be adopted not later than by end of 2025. The
Mm.
second thing in this Ukraine plan for housing is a law on social housing. And that's a law that should be adopted by the end of 2026. So this is kind of part of the package, and Ukraine, we are supporting Ukraine to do this with both expertise sitting in Kiev and also in other countries. And in addition to these reforms, which the Ministry of Development is the main they are the ministry who is responsible for this.
Mm.
But in addition to reform support, we can also provide support for investments. And this is the second pillar, the pillar with the guarantees and blended finance. And so far, what we have done is that we are supporting two programs, one with the World Bank and one with the Council of Europe Development Bank. And these programs, I mean, the one with the World Bank, it provides a loan to the government of Ukraine, which is then given to people who have lightly damaged buildings, buildings that have been lightly damaged during the war. Then people can go and get the funding from the ministry via the World Bank to buy
Mhm.
windows and buy materials to
Repairs.
renovate. Yes, to renovate. So this we are providing through the World Bank, and the second one with the Council of Europe Development Bank, that is actually money going to people who have lost their homes, people who have homes that have been totally destroyed, or homes which are now in occupied territories. And there you can get, vouchers to buy new homes, and the average is about 36,000 euros per family to buy a new home. So
Mhm.
these are one of the programs. We also support directly the construction of housing for IDPs. And this is something that we're doing with NEFCO, Nordic Environment Finance Corporation, that you, Lena, know very well because you have been working on it to
I
some
also
extent.
happen to know this project quite well, or at
Yes,
least one part
yes,
of it, yes.
yes. So this, with the support through NEFCO, NEFCO is then working with municipalities, and they are either converting old buildings and to make
Mhm.
IDP homes for them, or they construct new buildings. So this is one thing. And then, in addition to this, something that I would like to speak about as well is, which is very promising. This is a program that we're doing together with EIB, which is a pilot program for social housing, where EIB will be lending to the state. And in the first pilot phase, it's going to be 50 million euro from EIB in loans, which will be supported with investment grants from this
Mm.
Ukraine investment framework.
Loans to
To,
municipality, or is this a bigger loan to the government?
the way it's structured now is that it will be a loan to the sovereign, to the Ministry of Finance,
Mm.
but on lent to municipalities. And they will select one or two, three pilot municipalities where they will construct social housing in accordance with best European practice, and help the municipality, if they don't already have this municipal housing utility, help the municipality to create a sustainable housing utility with a first stock of housing for rent, which will then, operate. And if everything goes well, this housing utility in the municipality will then be working in the same way as good examples in the European Union. And then people will move in, they will pay rent and pay the rent for what it costs to construct the building, but also for a little bit of profit for the housing utility to be able to construct more housing. So this is the plan.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. So, but essentially, this is very impressive. Everything that is being done and supported by the European Union, incredible. But from what I hear, is several models at the moment, because this program that you mentioned of European Union financing the reconstruction or new construction of housing. Essentially, this is grant funding at the moment to municipalities, and then the municipalities, based on the national decree, are allocating these newly or reconstructed apartments or newly constructed apartments to the IDP families, and then if I'm not wrong, as far as I remember, based on this regulation, the families are receiving this housing for 10 years, and with probably certain maintenance payments and so on. This I'm not sure, but 10 years, and when I'm thinking that Ukraine is already 12 years in all in war, right? 10 years sounds like a lot from now, but we're also soon hitting 4 years of the full scale war. And, the 10 years are going to run out very fast, right? So, but this is one model. And this other one with the own lending to municipalities, and in principle, municipal companies will be managing this housing, but this is already the loan funding, right? With the purpose to provide more financing for these products. But do you think these are like tested different options that you are testing, developing, and of course this needs then the market needs to pick up on your own. But is there one of your favorites, one of these models that you think will be a real winner or success story?
Yes, from my point of view, the model proposed by EIB is the preferred option. And I need to tell you that, I mean, this thing about it's been possible to rent only for 10 years, that's not the case, because the housing that will be provided for municipalities will be for rent and people can stay there as long as they want. But it's also depending on the fact, because in parallel, they are developing the new legislation for social housing. And at the moment, we don't have this legislation. We don't have the general principles law. So there needs to be reforms in parallel. But the thought with this pilot scheme with European Investment Bank is that people who are coming to live in these apartments, it, of course, I mean, IDPs and vulnerable groups will be one of the people, the type of people who will live there. However, it's important to say that these housing units will be open for everyone. It will be open for the whole public in the city where they are constructed, because this is also something which has been experienced from Europe, is that if you provide housing for vulnerable groups only, and normally, I mean, if you look at the UK, for example, I mean, you create this social housing where people, vulnerable groups live. It creates a little bit the sense of a ghetto,
Yes.
and this is not what we want to create. We want to have social housing which is open for everyone. Of course, it should be in the beginning now, given the war, the situation of the war, it should be available for vulnerable groups like veterans and IDPs and so on and so forth. But the basic idea behind this housing model that EIB will then be working with the municipalities on is to provide housing for everyone.
Yeah, this is, of course, from point of view of
Yes,
urban
yes,
planning and social
yes,
disparities. It's, I'm always impressed in Vienna how you go to the first district
yes,
city center, then you all of a sudden have
yes,
this very nice, cozy looking things,
yes,
but it is, I don't know, an apartment for 200 euros, right? This is incredible
yes.
to make this mix. And this, of course, would be very important to consider in Ukraine, because there are already certain challenges in some cities with land allocation and so on. You can't find
Yes,
so easily good spots where um, where you can simply construct something like this. Of course, 1 or 2 houses you can always integrate, but we're talking then these are then 50 apartments, and we need tens of hundreds of thousands in the
Yeah.
next decade or so to come. It's
Mm.
of course the size of a task is quite challenging, but
Mm.
if we are so. Um, to get this moving, of course, the technical assistance and in frames of Ukraine facility that what is coming now in technical assistance and this macroeconomic support tied to all these reforms. I'm only thinking, when is the market coming for this, right? Because of course the market has to be ready. Someone also has to construct it. So if we're talking about if you say that the laws have to be passed by in 2025, and then on the social housing and by the end of 2026, right? So here we're talking 1.5 years. In parallel, some programs are being developed to launch this. So we're talking 3-4 years in time when we will see activity in this sector starting up, right? Is this also your expectation for timeline, roughly?
Yes, it will take time. However, it's important to do things right in the beginning. And in addition to these laws that will be adopted, there's also, I mean, in the Ukraine plan, the need for Ukraine to draft a national housing strategy. And this is something that they already started working on. And in this strategy, I mean, they will look at what does Ukraine need for the future to have a well-functioning housing market. And one thing that would be needed, for example, is a housing financing utility or agency where you could have municipal companies come and take loans at low interest rates to be able to replicate the model that we try to do together with the European Investment Bank. Because this is
Mhm.
the idea that you will do a pilot scheme in 1 to 2 municipalities. And in addition to the EIB, we also have another program with AFD, the French Development Bank. They also do something similar to the EIB, social housing program. And AFD also has a lot of experience doing these kind of programs in other countries. So with these two pilots, with EIB and with AFD, we
Mhm.
hope that we can create some kind of a model that can be replicated to other municipalities. But of course, as you say, it will take time. And in the meantime, there will also be a need for private sector to come in to construct the way that they do. But it's important to have rules and regulations which are making it possible to, I mean, for example, there's no regulation on tenants. I mean, how much should you pay as a tenant, and what's the security for you if you have the renting an apartment or living in an apartment? These kind of rules also need to be in place before you can have a booming housing market. So all of these things need to come into place. But I'm sure that there will be a lot of construction activity going on. But it's also the question about where, I mean, if you look at the geography of Ukraine, uh, do we really need to rebuild all the cities that were now, or do we need to rethink about how Ukraine should be graphically looking in the future? So it's a lot of different things that Ukraine need to think about for the future, and housing will be in the core of it.
Okay. And from all these experiences and case studies that you have, I don't know, compared and studied different models of social housing in Ukraine, is there one that you would say, please do not do like this? So this like best case failure scenario. Is there something that Ukraine for sure should not do that you know that has already failed?
Yes, there are some lessons learned, and in this case, I had to speak to one of my colleagues who is a real urban expert to ask for what are the main things to avoid. And these are 4 points that she was given to me, and she's a professor for urban planning from Australian University, so she really knows what she's speaking about. These 4 points: one thing that you should avoid, over reliance on market driven development. and PPPs. And they have examples from Ireland, for example, where they have a similar system for social housing, but where they did it with PPP structure.
Mhm.
And this has failed quite immensely. So this is not
Ukraine and PPP are also not the best friends, you know.
yes, yes.
Okay.
And another thing that is a lessons learned is that you should not allow undersupply of the public stock. I mean, if you look at Ukraine until 1990, you had a lot of publicly owned housing units. After the reforms in 1991, they almost disappeared. So this is also something which is, lesson learned that in a functioning housing market, there is a need for publicly owned housing units.
Is there like certain percentage? Because of course, if all the municipalities starting to construct this cheaper or more affordable housing and then take all these cheaper loans, then where the private sector will go? They cannot survive only based on the VAP exclusive high-end real
No,
estate type of thing. So
yeah,
is there
I
like
think I
a rule
think
of
the
thumb?
average in Europe is about 30 to 35% publicly
Okay,
owned housing. That's kind of the
interesting.
average. So
Okay,
this
so
means
more
that
we
in
should not
Ukraine,
do. Okay.
yeah, more you should not do. You should not ignore resident participation in decision making. If you look at Ukraine, for example, where you have not regulated, you can have a 3-story building where people live and they think is very nice. And then a private developer gets the building permit to build a 20-story building. And in the shadow, the 3-story building lives. And do you think the people there are very happy about this? Not so. So, so
I
you
live in
should
one of
have.
those buildings.
Okay. So, I mean, this is also something that is very important that people who live in the housing, they should have a possibility to influence the decision making on housing.
But
And
these are urban codes, and this is in bigger cities
yes,
is a complete disaster. This,
yes, yes. And the fourth one is gentrification via renovation mandates. If you allow certain areas of a city to become much more expensive and people cannot afford to live there, those who cannot afford, this is also not good for city planning and for the well-being of the citizens in the city.
okay. These are good. These are good to know.
Yeah.
When okay, so we discussed that obviously social housing does not have to be free, and in principle, in nature, it cannot be free because someone in the end has to pay for it and to maintain it. But where does the sustainability stand in all this? In these programs specifically that are supported by European Union, in all these dialogues, we have to build back better or build better forward. Do you think it's realistic? Because also in our mentalities, very often comes this affordable housing has to be cheap, so cheaper
Mm.
materials, cheaper technologies, and so on, right? All this high end or VAP mode or something like this, then is full of heat pump, solar panels, independent energy supply, super insulated, and so on. Do you think Ukraine can really reach this balance? And what does international experience say on that?
I'm confident that Ukraine can do this as well because building energy efficient does not mean that it needs to be expensive. I mean, it can be a little bit more expensive than the cheapest one, but if you look at the life cycle cost for something that is easier to maintain and has a lower energy consumption, on the long run, it's much better to build something that is more energy efficient. And I think that in Ukraine they have adopted something on a non-zero buildings, which is something that they have
Nearly zero, and
taken.
now is
Yes,
the.
or
I recently spoke to Irish accent also in the previous
yes,
podcast, I think, and
yes.
they already are moving also social housing because partially we touched on that during the conversation. This was not the core focus, but also this from NZEB requirements to
Mm,
ZEB requirements, zero energy buildings.
yeah.
But I think. But isn't it so that because in the projects that we that I know of, and parts of my teams are participating. This is often like, you want to integrate solar panels and the heat pump and do 20 millimeters thicker insulation or something like this. But then you are thinking, okay, but this is 3 more apartments that we could integrate, right, with this money. And it's a tough choice
Mm.
to find this balance. Any wisdom on
Mm.
that?
I mean, I'm sure that you know more about these things than I do, but I know that, for example, in both this EAB pilot and the AFD pilot, they will integrate energy efficiency. And I mean, you also need to think about the EU regulations when it comes to energy efficient buildings, which the Directive of Energy Efficient Buildings, which Ukraine needs to comply with in maybe not at once, but in the near future. So from this point of view, for Ukraine, it would be important to comply with this also already from the beginning. So of course, you may construct a few more apartments if you do a thinner insulation and less solar panels, but in the long run, you will benefit, all parties will benefit from doing more energy efficient and sustainable housing.
So build back better. You are the
Build
fan of
back
the
better.
build back
Yes,
better, not
yes,
faster, right? I
no,
did debate once on
yes,
on
yes.
this point. It's a tough call. Now, thank you for all these views and visions, and a little bit of dreaming, right? I know I'm cautious of time, but I think we're coming to the last 1 or 2 questions. If you could um, think in the next, let's say, 10, 20 years of a truly inclusive and a resilient Ukrainian city with the social housing that would be done right, how would you visualize that?
Yeah, I first of all, I hope that Ukraine will be able to reconstruct without a war soon, hopefully already this year. So that's the first point. But then, I mean, in a future Ukrainian city, I think it will be a city where you have mixed tenures. I mean, you have both private housing, you have social affordable housing, and you also have uh, nearby good connections with public transport, and you have green areas, and you also have a possibility to work where you live, not too far away. And I think also that one key importance for Ukraine will be these municipal housing utilities, that you will have these kind of utilities as you have in many other parts of Europe. They have been neglected, they need to be restarted again, and based on this rent-based, I mean, the possibility that
Model.
people who come there and live there, they pay the price that it cost, and also that you have good governance for people living there. I mean, both when it comes to you can live in a homeowners association even if you own your flat, so you have a possibility to influence the decision making, but also when it comes to the planning of the municipality, when a new housing will be built next door, you will have a possibility to have a say to the municipality in the planning process. And also that the land plots owned by municipalities should be wisely used. And this is also something that I think is important for Ukraine going forward.
Oh, thank you. And then
Yeah.
I guess maybe to leave us with the last few messages, if we could summarize. So you have spoken a lot about what Ukraine has to do right now, what is in process, how the EU is supporting. But if you could recommend, I don't know, 3, 5 priority actions for faster launching of this effective social housing strategy in Ukraine, what would be your top 3, 5 wish list of actions that have to be done and things have to be done?
The first thing is to enact the law on general principles for housing, which will unlock, I mean, this debate on the housing code
Hmm.
for that has been used. This must be taken as soon as possible. And the second thing is also to draft a good national housing strategy that will provide Ukraine with kind of a roadmap where to go. And this important also that this national housing strategy is not only done by international consultants. This is something that needs to be developed and owned by Ukrainians themselves. So therefore there needs to be an inclusive process, not only by the government and the ministries, but also by other Ukrainian partners like NGOs or developers or private companies. This should be an inclusive process. And then, of course, this thing about municipal housing utilities, to have such sustainable utilities, to start piloting these social affordable housing schemes and to make them work and to make them being replicated in other parts of the country. I think that's also very important. So these would be my three main priorities for Ukraine at the moment.
Thank you. I would love to ask many more questions, but I think we have to leave something maybe for the next time. With this, I would very much like to thank you for being with us today, for your enthusiasm and support and the energy. And I observe a lot frequently all the activities and actions that are being done not only by the European Union or your colleagues, but you also personally and since so many years. So thank you for that. With this, I would also like to thank all our viewers or readers who will read the text version of the podcast. Don't forget to sign up for the subscribe to the YouTube channel and EUEA social network so you can follow our next podcasts and conversations that matter. Thank you,
Okay, but
Jan.
thank you. Yes,
Thank you
and
for being with us, and we stay in touch.
and thank you very much for hosting me and to make it possible for me to come and speak about this very important topic. And last but not least, I would like to say Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam slava. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena.